Ireland remain on course for another Six Nations Grand Slam after recording a comprehensive win over Wales at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday. And on the latest episode of the Left Wing podcast, we will assess Ireland's campaign to date after 3 consecutive bonus point victories has been on the cusp of back-to-back Six Nations titles. Will Slattery here with you, delighted to be joined in studio by Rúaidhrí O'Connor and on the line by Luke Fitzgerald. And Rud, it's been dominant, it's been impressive. 3 wins out of 3, 11 wins in a row in the championship, stretching back to 2022. You know, a lot to get into tonight as we look back on not only the Wales game, but, you know, kind of take stock after the opening 3 weeks of matches. But for you, what's kind of jumped out to you as the most impressive thing of what Andy Farrell's side have achieved over the last couple of weeks?
I think the way they've parked the World Cup and been able to perform as if it never happened is incredibly impressive, especially in the wake of Johnny Sexton's retirement. And we all know how important he was to the team, right up until the fact that he stayed on until the 83rd, 84th minute in Paris, as they tried to kind of overcome that deficit against New Zealand. You know that the Farrell, even in that moment, it never seems to cross his mind even to replace Johnny Sexton, that he went down with the ship. He was the captain and he's not there anymore, and the ship's fine. You know, it's been really impressive. And I think if you go back to the, not many people were tipping Ireland to win this tournament, but because I think we all thought there would be a bit of a hangover, we all thought there would be a bit of a transition after Johnny, and the way the team has picked up and where it left off with Jack Crowley at the helm has been super impressive, and I think when you contrast it with France, it's even there's such a the graph has moved in such different directions for those two teams who were 2 of the best 4 teams in the world at the World Cup not that long ago. One is now plummeting and the other one is still, right on course and kind of looking like it's going to, retain its title and win it back-to-back Grand Slam. So I think there's lots to like about Ireland. There's lots that's impressed me, but I think that mental resolve to just park the incredible disappointment of a World Cup ending the way it did and come back a couple months later and keep performing has been very impressive.
Yeah, because it feels like a page has been turned, but it's like, in terms of just days or months since the World Cup, it's been a very short space of time, but it feels like a lot of time has passed. But as you say, to be able to hit the ground running from night one, when it was set up for France to hit the ground running. It was Marseille, it was this new venue, there was a great atmosphere, and then Ireland just went out and laid waste to France. And it's hard to know if Ireland had played poorly and France had maybe squeaked the win, would all of a sudden have they been able to kick on, or if it was almost like the well had been poisoned from a French perspective heading into the tournament. It's hard to know, I suppose.
Well, I think we can ascertain from France's ill discipline, from their inaccuracy, that they're not the same team that they were. That something has been broken within that setup. I mean, obviously they've lost their best player as well, but they haven't dealt with that in any way as well as Ireland have. And Philempsa getting 2 yellow cards that night, it's almost like a canary in the coal mine as to how he's a very reliable, solid international rugby player who's
reliable to get a yellow card as well.
Well, sure, but even there was to make the same mistake twice in the same game, and I just thought it spoke volumes about where France are mentally and how they have been broken by that World Cup, but. Just Ireland didn't give them a chance. Ireland didn't allow them that opportunity. They never gave them a sniff, and they haven't given anyone a sniff really across the 3 games. Probably last Saturday was their least impressive of the 3 performances in some ways, but I think Wales played a big part in that, and yet they were still able to beat the spread, and it took them 81 minutes to get the 4 tries, but their record of getting bonus points in the Six Nations is remarkable. So, it's the best Irish team we've ever seen, certainly the most consistent Irish team we've ever seen, and to be able to do that while kind of making that major change away from Sexton to integrate a new 10, to use the squad, he's used a lot of players. I think he's used more players than nearly anyone else in this tournament. Andy Farrell as well, using that Italy game to make a lot of changes. There is such a good spot. They're in such a healthy spot. The great shame, I suppose, is that it's 3 years until the next World Cup, until they get a chance to kind of right that wrong, because it's hard to know what they can. I think the big challenge for him as he refreshes the team over the course of a couple of years is also to trying to keep motivation levels high, because they're so far ahead of the pack and they're winning these games so comfortable. To keep reframing things and keep that consistency high, I guess the All Blacks are the only team we've ever seen who have been able to do it, but their relentless winning record is it's very impressive.
Yeah, 11 Six Nations wins in a row, all of them by double digits as well. I think 13 points is the lowest winning margin that they got twice in last year's tournament. So they have, as you said, not only not given team a sniff over the last 3 match days, but going back to 2022 in the tournament, they've been very dominant and comprehensive. Luke, from your perspective, like what's jumped out to you over the first 3 weeks in terms of what Ireland have done well, or what you've been most impressed with in terms of anything Rudd said, or what you've kind of gleaned yourself?
I just haven't been surprised, but I just think they're a really good team. The big concern for me was probably how Jack Crowley was going to fit in, but just because of how his form has been a little bit patchier maybe with Munster than I thought. But he seems like a smart enough guy to have realised that thing that I was saying to you just before the competition started, Will, that he just kind of has to slot in there. And there's actually loads of really top quality players around him. So that mental hurdle was always going to be the hardest thing for him, was that it wasn't going to be all about him, that he just actually has to facilitate all the really good players around him. I think he's done that really well and shown bits of class himself. He stayed true to his kind of own style of play, but also he's generally looked for the simple thing, a few odd ones here and there, which you'd expect from a kind of a budding international. But I think maybe I was expecting there might be some kind of slump, but at the same time, I'm still not surprised. Like if you think about the guys in that pack, I've just been so impressed with them. Like in open play, they're so hard to contain, and I actually thought Wales did quite a good job of that in the weekend. I know we're going to get into the game a little bit more after this. Like I mean, the officiating and us getting 2 yellow cards. Yes, I actually think we probably deserved 2 yellow cards, but how they didn't get one, even though the decisions were poor in the first half and very, very harsh at times, that was really kind of amazing to me, how they didn't get a yellow card in the first half. It wasn't talked about at all. I was on a Welsh radio station for the game. But yeah, look, I just feel like this team is a really, it's like a tale of 2 different countries and everything that kind of goes on behind the scenes. If you get me, like if you look at Ireland, I think we'll be consistent for quite a while, actually. I think we have a way of playing now, kind of similar to all those New Zealand teams over those years. That's why you get that consistency. And I think a lot of the provinces, like it's a real strong base that we're picking from. Conversely, you look at Wales and the regions and kind of how difficult things have become there for various reasons. I think you're seeing all that hard work and the real strong foundations come through this Irish team. And I expect us to be a real threat and one of the top 3 teams in the world, at least, I think, for the next 10 years. I really believe that. I think we've got a really good foundation. So long story short, nothing's really surprised me, Will. I've been really impressed with them. I think we've got a great coaching staff too, which does help as well. Very settled, you know. Farrell and his coaching staff, he leads it so well, doesn't he? Like he's a real calming presence and seems to have a real good, like, look, they obviously are quite good tactically, but he has his man management skills. I think is what it kind of that's what calms me about looking on this team. And can he continually reframe this for them? I think he'll be able to do that. I think his man management skills will be able to kind of bridge that gap and keep him there for a long time when there's going to be changeover of bodies, like a Sexton goes, or Peter O'Mahony goes soon. You know that kind of way. So I know I've covered loads there, but yeah, it's been so good to see it. It's so enjoyable going to watch the team there. Like, even though they didn't play great in the weekend, like, it's great. Like, they still beat them very comprehensively, you know?
Yeah, just to pick up the Andy Farrell point, Rudd, because I think a testament you can pay to him and the coaching staff is that, like, going into this tournament, I was wondering about the form of some of the key players. You know, I didn't think Leinster have been unbelievably impressive this year. I know they got that big scalp in La Rochelle, but that was kind of a roll up the sleeves performance rather than one when they played, you know, really well from start to finish. And I think consistently you've seen when they go into Ireland camp, as good as they have been for Leinster, for Munster, for Connacht, for Ulster, the collective improves immeasurably, I think, which says a lot considering how good they generally are when they get into the Ireland camp. And that has to be down from the top down, from Andy Farrell setting that tone.
Yeah, and like they do talk an awful lot about how much they enjoy the environment. And it's not just talk. You can see it from, like, I was around them a fair bit in Portugal before the tournament started, and even just happened to be in the vicinity of their team meeting just after he'd named the team for the opening game against France in Marseille. And I wasn't within earshot of being able to hear what was being said, but I was nearby, and all you could hear coming out of the room was guffaws of laughter. Like, there was just this, it was like a stand-up comedian was doing a routine at the top of the room, and then they went out and trained. So there is like, that does help. I think they really do. Like, that stuff is not kind of trite sound bites you're getting out of camp. I think they do genuinely love being there. And like that's half the battle, isn't it? Like, being able to obviously you also have to have a good sound tactical plan and be very good players, but they have that as well. And I think Farrell, the way he dealt with the World Cup failure and the way he framed it as gone, I'm already over it. At the Six Nations launch, in comparison to what Galtier's been hanging on to it and kind of I think the French, it's kind of because he hasn't released it, the players can't release it either, and it's kind of seeped into their whole tournament. Whereas even though I listened to Hugo Keenan talking today, and he's not over the World Cup, and a lot of them aren't over the World Cup, they've been able to channel it into good performances rather than let it kind of seep into a negative mindset. And the work Farrell's done with Gary Keegan, I think, has been key to that as well. The bit of a change up in terms of going 6-2 on the bench, having Crowley there, it's just a little bit, there's a bit of freshness without throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well. So I think Farrell's done a magnificent job. I think he has done ever since kind of obviously he was putting them in, when the results were going badly, the foundations were being laid and we couldn't see them from the outside. And what we could see was a pretty poor team who appeared to be going nowhere. And then obviously they had that game against England, and ever since they've been on a roll. And I think what he's been able to do is successfully reframe the team's ambitions. He's been able to kind of, he's never been satisfied. Like, they had a good tournament in 2022 when they lost in France, and he was like, that's not good enough. And the following year they come back and win a Grand Slam, and this year they're coming back having won the Grand Slam, and it looks like they're going to win the Grand Slam even better by larger winning margins with more bonus points. It's remarkable, and I think he is key to that. Like, he is the main man, he is the alpha in that relationship. He's not alone. Like, Simon Easterby's doing a great job with the defence, Paul O'Connell's doing a great job with the forwards, the lineouts improved. The players are performing, and they have to take responsibility to some degree for that. But Farrell also has put the conditions in place for them to do so well.
Yeah, Luke, we're touching the defence there. I wanted to get your opinion on it because you're obviously kind of one of your big things that you like to discuss. I think in the last 13 Six Nations games, Ireland have conceded 13 tries only. The next best defensive record is 28 tries conceded, so almost double what Ireland have conceded. Like, how impressed have you been, or what are you noticing in their defence that's been so successful for them? And even in this tournament, they've conceded 3 tries in 3 games, so that average, it's going to be very difficult to beat a team when you're only conceding 1 try a game.
Yeah, it really is, provided, of course, that your kind of penalty count doesn't really balloon or whatever. But yeah, look, I think what impresses me most is, like, I still think they could be a little bit better out the pitch, but what I love about them is they really hang tight for each other. Like, there was a period in that game where Wales, if they got a try, I think was it 17-7 maybe at one point, or 24. So there's a period where, like, it was kind of in the balance, and they just really hung tight for each other, and they always seem to come up with that big turnover and big moments. The same thing happens in lots of the big games. Think of the South Africa win. You think of the France win at times as well, even though I know they were down to 14 men, but there was periods where there was kind of big turnovers, or kind of key moments, guys kind of, showing up for each other consistently. And that's kind of hard. It happens so often that it sticks in my mind when I think of them defensively. I think they're probably putting themselves in positions maybe a little bit more often than they have to. I think they're a better team than that. And I think there's still growth for them in the defense, but it's one thing that you can't really quantify, but it happens so often that it's definitely a thing with this team, is that they have great fighting spirit and they never give up, and they've got a real nice balance as well, I think, of guys who can really compete on the ground. They've got about 4 or 5 guys, no matter who, from the bench or starting in that pack, and the 2 guys in the centre generally excellent at competing on the ground. So they're bloody hard. Like, I played on teams that I always feel like it's something that's not really mentioned about the teams that I played on, but Gordon Darcy and Brian O'Driscoll, they were like 2 extra back rowers playing. They were a nightmare. Like, they'd come up with 3 or 4 turnovers a game if you were loose. And some backs aren't great at rucking either, are not that passionate about it. But I think this Irish team has a lot of that too. You think of Robbie Henshaw, you think of Bundy Akey is a nightmare in there as well. I think of some of the turnovers he had against Wales in the weekend. Particularly in the first half, like, it stopped them getting any kind of momentum in the game. I think they've got that across the pitch. And you've got to be tough and hard-nosed to have them, but you've got to want to fight for each other too. So that's what I think is great about this defence. And I still think there's a journey for them to go. There's like another, I'm going to call it 2 or 3%. You probably wouldn't notice it on the eye, and the stats are great. And I think we could be cautious about that, because I do think while we're very positive and bullish on this team, I do think the competition is probably at its weakest for quite a while. I can't think of an English player I'd put in a World 15. Maybe a Toje. Maybe. And that's usually you'd have one guy where you'd have at least conversations. Like they're really weak. France, as I said, are not in a good place. Scotland seem to be in a good place. I don't know why, but they are. They're playing reasonably well, I suppose. But I think it's a weak competition as well. So I think the summer is probably what I'll be looking more closely at. I think that'll be more defining for this team, and we can judge them a bit more closely about, have they come on a little bit since the World Cup, or are they still in the same place from that? But look, really enjoyable watch at the moment, and I love seeing them showing up for each other in defence. I think it's such a good trait to have in a team.
They're incredibly fit as well, aren't they? I agree with Luke about the tournament is not strong this year, but all the teams have been going since the end of June in terms of this long season. And I know the Irish players are managed better than everyone else, and like even Scotland have a lot of players based abroad, so it's harder for them to kind of manage. And Gregor Townsend has had a big spiel this week about how he doesn't have access to his players in between rounds 3 and 4 because of Premiership rules. But Ireland's conditioning, the work Jason Cowman and Kieran Ruddock have done with them, is phenomenal. Even their injury record, O'Keenan and Ringrose are back for Twickenham. Like, there's very few players unavailable. Mac Hansen really is the only member of the squad who's kind of, or Jimmy O'Brien, I guess, as well, who they're missing. They're in great nick for a World Cup year. And that 7.5 minute, I was critical in the post-game podcast of their game management in that period where Ty Byrne was in the sim, and I did think they maybe should have gone to the boot a little bit more, played a bit for territory, got the ball off the pitch. But watching them back again today, they backed their fitness. And I think we saw the reward for that in the end game, because they were still going and in the build-up to Ty Byrne's try. And Dylan Lewis, the poor old replacement tight head prop for Wales, was gone. Like, he absolutely gone. By the time Byrne waltzed past him and scored a try, he had nothing left. He had nothing left. He managed to nail Caelan Doris 2 phases before that, and that was his last act. That was it. He was done. He got up on his feet and he just couldn't do it anymore. And the conditioning that they have compared to some of the teams they're playing against, like France, some of those players don't look very well conditioned at all. And they're playing a different sport as well. Like, they're moving the ball more. They're determined to keep the ball on the pitch. They're determined to keep the ball in hand. They're determined to move the ball. They're determined to go through the phases. And they're the fittest team in the tournament, I think, and that's standing to them as well. So they're setting a standard for this tournament because they haven't dropped their standards. Everyone else, apart from, I think Scotland, are about the same as they were last year, and maybe are a more mature team. I think Finn Russell's a more mature player. And probably
definitely a good point.
Yeah, I think they've bounced back a little bit from the World Cup very well, in fairness to Scotland, and they've probably got more cohesion. Everyone else, I think, has gone backwards to a degree. Italy are better than they were at the World Cup, in fairness, but they're not really in the conversation we're talking about.
Yeah, because when we were watching the World Cup, I think everyone was kind of consensus agreement. There was 4 standout teams: France, Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa. 2 of them don't play in this tournament. One of them is blown up.
Yeah,
that leaves one standout world-beating team in this tournament, and at the moment, that's kind of being borne out. Obviously, we're only halfway through. There's 2 tough games to come, but in terms of what we've seen thus far, it certainly looks that way. Like, so maybe we shouldn't be. Not that anyone's surprised. As Luke said, he's not surprised, and I am either, I suppose. But
no one saw France collapsing. Yeah. So I mean, I think the pre-tournament expectations were that Ireland and France would have a bit of a hangover, but Ireland haven't had any hangover, and France have a terrible hangover. They still haven't. It might last 4 years, like the way things are going. So I think there's a bit of. I think that's why we're surprised. I think everyone was unsure with all the retirements and people stepping away. Everyone was unsure as to where everyone was. But like Ireland and Scotland are the only ones.
The last 2 years, it's been Ireland and France neck and neck. There was no real reason going into this tournament to think that wouldn't be the case again. Because, as you said, both teams suffered quarterfinal defeats. Both teams lost their captains, so it should have been kind of reasonably par. And I was expecting a cracker in Marseille, and then maybe it'll come down to points difference at the end. But yeah, the French decline has been startling.
But 9 and 10 guys is a big loss. It's a big loss. Like, I know Jalabert is good, but I think we're kind of seeing now why that difference exists and why Ntamak has made that jersey his own, because obviously they were fighting it out. They were kind of duking it out at a point, So taking those 2 guys out, and I do think, like, Sexton, Dupont is a different level. Dupont, I was having this conversation with someone where, like, I think he might be the best rugby player I've ever seen, and I never thought I'd say someone might be more influential than McCaw, but I think he might be. I think he's unbelievable. Now he won't have the World Cups. I don't think maybe he doesn't get mentioned in that conversation against McCaw. But I don't know. Like he's just so like the stuff he was doing on the same weekend of the opening fixture against Ireland for Toulouse. Like there was a phase of play where I thought he literally has done everything in the game in that one phase of play, finishing it off with like a crossfield kick. I was like, the guy can do everything, you know. So I think we probably. I thought he might. I thought the team actually. I think I was giving the rest of the team more credit at the start of the tournament. I thought that kind of similar to Ireland, the rest of the players were like really, really outstanding, you know, and that it would just be a case of kind of feeding them and kind of fitting into a system. I don't think that's the case with France anymore. I think actually Dupont is bloody important for them. Like, and he's a nightmare. Like he seems to occupy so much space in the opposing team's mind as well because he's on the ball so much. And then remember Raj talking about like, you know, he's pretty much impossible to plan for because he always seems to be around the ball, even if there's a break in play, you know, when it's kind of loose ball and stuff. So I think probably we might be underestimating the impact of losing those two guys, whereas we only have one, and you have the likes of Conor Murray and Gibson Park to kind of mind you through it, you know. And Gibson Park has become such an important part of Ireland's game plan. So, sorry, I just thought I'd say that just because I do think,
good point.
You know, when he comes back in and Ntamack come back in, you know, things could change quite quickly for this French team. So, you know, I think maybe like next year's competition, for example, you know, I could see them being back. Like I think France have fixed a lot of the problems within the game there. And they should, I think we should see them a more consistent outfit going forward. But those two guys coming back in will change the game. I do think.
But it is funny, like before the tournament, you know, I was talking about Dupont going to the sevens and I was saying I didn't agree with it. I thought it was bad for the captain to be stepping away in terms of after the World Cup. And I couldn't have foreseen how bad, if I knew it was going to be this bad, I would have been railing against it even more. I wonder what he feels now, what his teammates feel, what Fabien Galtier feels. I know everyone thinks he's a, you know, whatever, he's a bit of an asshole, but like the captain's left him in the lurch, like, and now the team is going off the rails. What do the French supporters think who pay for their season tickets? You know, if Johnny Sexton was in his mid-20s and had decided to play sevens instead of retiring, like,
didn't look like it bothered Antoine Dupont over in Vancouver as he made his first steps.
Awesome.
It looked awesome, man. I think he's being pretty single-minded and selfish and gone, I missed the chance to win a World Cup in Paris. I'm going to go and win an Olympic medal, and I think that's the way he's framing it for himself, and it does seem like he's not really getting the flack over there. I think a lot, like the focus is on Galtier, who I think does have a lot of enemies within the French game. I think it looks
like they're really waiting to pounce.
Yeah, like there are. In my mind, there are parallels with Ireland in 2008 when 2007 went so badly, and then you know, Eddie's last year in 2008 and things went really sour really quickly, and you know, a very successful coaching regime came to a very sour end on the back of a World Cup disappointment. But it does sound like the French really can't afford to get rid of Galtier. At the same time, Brendan Fanning in our jury on Monday had some figures about how much they're in debt after that World Cup, and it's pretty high. So, and he's under contract until the next World Cup. So they look like a team who need to get to the end of this tournament, maybe get on tour during the summer and bring in some fresh faces, and obviously get Dupont back on board for November and just get a bit of a break from each other. It's like it does look like the ultimate World Cup hangover, that they will get over it at some stage, but they look so much like the France of pre-2019. You know, Marc Lièvremont's France or Guy Noves's France, that team that was just so depressingly awful and added so little to the Six Nations. And Ireland always found difficult to beat all the same, but it was the tournament is lesser for them being so poor, definitely.
The thought did occur to me that if like Galtier all of a sudden, you know, they lose, you know, to England or to Wales and it really goes pear-shaped, he leaves, Ronan O'Gara could potentially be the next French coach. You know, I know La Rochelle had a sticky couple of weeks, but he's won 2 Champions Cups. He could win another trophy this year. He'd be surely one of the standout candidates to take it on. We've seen that he can coach in French, you know, with a bit of a Cork twist on it. Like that could easily happen. Like, not easily, but like that's not a far-fetched possibility.
I think it's unlikely because I don't think they've ever had an overseas coach before, and I'd say they would look at Toulouse for probably their, you know,
Ugo Mola.
Ugo Mola, thank you, Will, because his name had escaped me briefly there. But I mean, he works with the 9 and 10. That they're the bulk suppliers. I agree. He's one of the outstanding candidates for the job, and I think will do a very good job with that group of players. But I just think the French would probably balk at the idea of someone not from France still, even though it's quite normal in most other countries. You never know, though. I mean, England went and got overseas coaches in the form of Eddie Jones when they were in crisis. But what do you reckon, Luke?
I think the obvious candidate would have been for them, like Joe Schmidt would have been a really obvious candidate. Like his French is like he's got beautiful French, you know what I mean? And they didn't go with him. No, so he's got really good French. Like, you know, he's a teacher, extremely bright guy. Like, not that Rog isn't, but Schmidt's on another level. And his French is ridiculously good, I think. And if they didn't get him at the time, I remember thinking, yeah, I think you're probably right, is what I'm saying. They seem to go from within. Although, you know, I think they might be looking at this current setup and think, do you know what? Like Sean Edwards, like he certainly doesn't look like he's got a nice snoss in his French, do you know, that kind of way. So, you know, maybe they might be looking at, and I think while they're not doing great in this tournament, I think he's had a big impact over the last number of years he's been there. And they might look at that and say, do you know what, actually, you know, it might be okay to look, you know, somewhere else for different knowledge, for different ideas. But I do think that's a really difficult job. I remember talking, I think Bernard Jackman has some really good insight on the process there when he was over in coaching in France, and just into how the FFR seemed to go about their business. I think it is a political beast, you know, to be the French coach, and it's very, very difficult to manage all the different views and some of the kind of old school ideas that were very prevalent before. This kind of setup is kind of, it's like probably the last two setups, they've been reasonably professional, you know. But I think Galtier has done a massive amount with this World Cup to get his hands on the players, you know, a little bit earlier and different things like that. So I think they're a good bit more professional. So I think with that, you might say they might take a more ruthless view on it and say, well, who's the best coach in the country? And you'd probably have to say O'Gara has been, you know, despite the losses in the top 14. I think the Champions Cup and what he's done with La Rochelle could be a candidate, but I'm leaning towards unlikely. I think you guys are right. I think it's for whatever reason they don't seem to want someone outside of France having the top job. It's certainly interesting. I hadn't thought. I know we've been talking about Galtier being under pressure, but I hadn't actually considered that the job might be on the line. I feel like they might stick with him just for a tournament, you know, given some of the loss he's had of kind of key guys. But yeah, it would be interesting to see who would come into play for that role.
Yeah, it'd be his first kind of setback since he took the job. In that jury you referred to, I said he deserved another kind of Six Nations or another window, certainly to try to right the ship. But like we've seen in France, you know, more so than any other country, they are pretty quick to make coaching changes, certainly in the top 14 anyway. So we'll watch that space. While we're on the subject of France, like the end game against Italy was obviously very dramatic. Paolo Garbisi hits the post, the last penalty. I think we're all in agreement that should have been retaken with given a penalty, given the encroachment. But like, what does just make of that whole scene? Like, it was just, it encapsulated so much of the drama, but then kind of confusion over rules and stuff. Like, it was just, it was all over the place.
Yeah, like I mean, it was incredibly dramatic, and it was the second half was one of the most dramatic games you're ever likely to see, in the way kind of the pressure mounted on France, and Italy kept having kind of been conservative initially, started to play, and they played a great game, Italy. France, like if you were Galtier and you were, you know, I'm sure their expected points was pretty high on Sunday. I think they probably created enough chances to win two games in the first kind of 40-50 minutes. But as the doubts were placed in their mind and the Italians grew in confidence, like the way they took that try was just superb for Cavazzo. So, like, it's what we want from this tournament. We want every game to be competitive, really, don't we? I know as our Irish fans are quite comfortable with them winning games by 30 points every week, but really what you want is six teams who are fairly equal. And France and Italy being equal makes for a far greater... It's a game you don't want to miss anymore. You know, like the Italy game next week, you'll make sure you watch it, because
could they take close to England as well in the first round? It's only that second round game which is the outlier.
Well, again, it goes back to what we were talking about in Ireland being so far ahead of the pack. So the it's much better to have an Italian team who have a chance and have players like Menicello and Cavazzo and like they're down a couple of bodies in their pack as well, but they were very good and they managed the game very well. And it looks like, I think we all saw how stale things got under Crowley from the Netflix documentary. We could see how that led into a World Cup that went awry. But the new voice, the fact their 20s are winning again, winning a big game.
I was going to say the 20s have been unbelievable, Roads, haven't they?
So that's like, it makes such a difference, doesn't it, Luke, to have them as a proper part of this tournament now. They're not just a nice weekend in Rome. They're actually a viable challenge to some of the teams.
And you would hope some of those, because I don't think this is just, I know obviously we're all talking about this fixture against France in the weekend for the 20s, but I think if I'm wrong, and I don't watch the 20s enough, to be honest with you, or to keep a close enough eye, and particularly the other teams anyway, but I think have they had 2 or 3 good teams in a row now that have been kind of competitive. So like that is always going to be the key for this, Italian outfit. They're never going to be picking from massive resources. To have some young guys coming through, like that'll kind of, I think that would create as well that little bit of, I suppose, an interest for the public there as well, so kind of exciting young talent coming through. And I think that would be so good to see. But yeah, it is great to see them kind of turn things around, be an interesting fixture now, like be a team that you're going, geez, Rome, like that's going to be tough. So you want to have, these kind of games where it's kind of tight. And I was delighted for them. I look gutted at in the same breath, but delighted that they got a result against France, because look, I still think France are bloody, like particularly like, at home, bloody difficult team to beat, that kind of way. So, and look, it's a shame that it ended the way it was. Like even the ball falling off the tee, like no one's really.
How did that happen? Like, I'd love to know how that actually happened.
Unlucky too. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like a comedy of kind of like.
It's an indoor stadium.
Like, can you call it an error if it falls off the tee? Like, so you got the bit of bad luck. Then you've got obviously all the panic, because everyone has moved on, because it's a penalty as well. I think everyone's being pretty harsh on the ref. The ball is still in play. Do you know what I mean? So I'm sure in his mind, he's probably like, okay, well, he's taking the kick. If the ball's falling off, it's another thing that's going to cause you to go, this is out of the ordinary. I'm not, you know what I mean? So straight away, there's all these other kind of elements going on. He hits the post. They're chasing it down to see if they can force an error from the French winger. I think it was Moana. Like, it's just like chaos at the end of the game. So I can see why he missed the guy charging the penalty, if you know what I mean, because there's so much happening. But I was delighted to see them get like some sort of result. I think it was very pleasing, and I think it's good for the tournament. I agree. I think a worrying kind of slide the last couple of years with them, and probably was a little bit worried about where they were going. But I think the stuff with the 20s and the little bit of resurgence this year has been very pleasing. And they seem to be playing a good brand as well. A few good tries here and there as well, particularly against England. I mean, England kind of might be kind of shut off towards the end of the game. England had a strong kind of middle third of the game, didn't they? But towards the end, when Italy started playing, like you'd hope that there's a bit of that belief maybe that they kind of got from that. I think that maybe they can sustain for the rest of the tournament and be a bit of a threat. You'd love to see them take another scalp as well. I think Wales are there for the taking for them.
Well, they've sold out. They sold out the game against Scotland this weekend or next weekend in record time. I think both of their games they've never sold more tickets for the Olympico, and I don't know if it's the new coach or probably the Netflix effect to some degree. And
can't be the World Cup anyway.
No, definitely not the World Cup. But
it's definitely not the World Cup.
And like there's been signs. I think Crowley did a good job. It just ran out of steam. That win in Cardiff a couple of years ago to beat Australia. There have been signs, and Luke's right. Like the 20s. Like their 20s have been way better than Scotland for the last couple of years, and probably Wales as well. Yeah. So they've got consistent results at that level, thanks in a large part to the work of Steve Aboud when he was over there working for Conor O'Shea. So there's a bit more of a platform for them to build on, and I think they're a genuine threat to both Scotland and Wales. I think Scotland probably are, as I said, are in good form and mature enough to get over there and get the result, and they haven't had that much trouble with Italy in the last couple of years. But what I liked about them in Dublin was that must have been a horrible day. They didn't score a point, they didn't play particularly well, but Italian teams have come over to Dublin and it's gone that way, and they've basically just sacked it in after about 50 minutes. But that team was still tackling, still defending, still organised right until the death, and Ireland had to play some pretty good rugby to get the scoreline that they did. So there was an attitude there and a buy-in, I think, to what Quesada's doing. And like Quesada, like the big obvious thing about the Netflix documentary, and I know I keep going back to it, was like Crowley and Neil Barnes talking to them in English the whole time, whereas Quesada's gone in, he's talking, he's Argentinian, he speaks Italian, he's speaking to them in their own language, he's talking about buying into a more Latin kind of culture and stuff, and I'm sure when Crowley first took over it didn't bother them, but towards the end they must have been going, hang on a second, you've been here for how long and you're not even making an effort. I think that does wear off with players. So look, it's they've got a draw, so they've got something tangible for this year, but they've a chance to finish above Wales if they can get a result in Cardiff, and they could run Scotland close as well. So that's positive progress, and it's good for the tournament.
I think it was a real full circle moment that Garbisi almost got timed out, considering Casada used to take like 3 hours to take a penalty when he used to play international. I think they brought in shot clocks literally, because he would literally just stand there for like 45 minutes standing over his ball.
I just can't believe there's no camera footage has emerged just focusing on the ball. Like, with all the phones in the stadium, how no one got an angle.
He must have put it at like just on like the edge of a table. When you put something on the edge of a table and it's kind of teetering for ages and this falls off. But yeah,
it's such bad luck. That was my. I kind of was surprised that, like, because obviously everyone's talking about it should have been retaken, which it should have been. No one talking about dropping off the tee, like, such bad luck.
But he obviously didn't. He obviously didn't place it correctly. Like, I don't.
What if there was a breeze or something? I don't know.
There's a roof in the stadium. Like, where's?
There was a lot of celebration once they won the penalty as well, and did that feed into the fact that did he have less time to do it? Did he rush it a little bit because he knew the clock was on? I think there's I need to go back and watch it frame by frame, but like, I think we need someone's
the emotional management of the moment was so
it wasn't great,
because
it wasn't an easy kick. Like, it was a genuinely tough kick, and he missed a couple in Dublin. It's not like he's been brilliant in this tournament off the tee. He actually did it pretty good. It was a pretty good attempt considering how little time he had.
But more so that, like, no one was clued into the fact that, like, the charge downs were clear, or the encroachment was clear. Like, it happened like twice, and like, how the captain
the ball falling off Will definitely would have caused like chaos. Everyone's like, "Oh, what's happening now? Is he going to drop kick it? Is he going to?"
None of the other players,
and we're also seeing a very inexperienced group of officials at this Six Nations, and I think maybe a Wayne Barnes or a Nigel Owens or someone of that kind of status would have seen this picture before and would have gone, "Hang on a second." Whereas Christopher Ridley's quite a new referee, and he missed it. Like,
I think he's one of the best referees. But like, that was a missed moment, like, no doubt. But yeah, provided plenty of drama. Just to switch back to Ireland for a second, Rud. So, like, we've talked about the positives, we talked about the dominance. 2 matches left, though. They haven't won anything yet. They could still come second or come third if they don't take care of business. What are the pitfalls? What are the things you're looking at over for the next 2 rounds to come, thinking this could scupper everything?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to that question. I mean, I don't really see.
You don't have to invent
I don't
things,
really see anything. Sorry, what are the pitfalls? Discipline. Their discipline hasn't been great. They've given away a lot of penalties. That's something that I'm sure they're working on when they get him back in camp in Dublin later this week. And if I think they give England access, and if they give England a bit of control on the scoreboard, I mean, even as I say that, I'm thinking that they were 10-0 up in Murrayfield and managed to lose by 9 points. So, this is not a great England team. This is an England team that, if you read the English media, it's like, it's guilty of muddled thinking. They're all calling for about 20 changes. It's hard to make a case. You're really looking at clutching at things like Twickenham and the fact that it's away from home, and that even 2 years ago,
the record of Twickenham has been dire for like 3 or 4 years.
England,
like,
England. Absolutely, and like Ireland won there 2 years ago.
Argentina, Ireland multiple times, South Africa, Scotland twice.
Yeah, look, if they underperform, they're not that good that they can get away with it against good teams. And I think Scotland, if it was in Murrayfield, I would be a little bit more cautious about that one. But really, from this point, if they played to anywhere near their potential in those 2 games, I think they win. They might be knocked off their stride for a bit, but they're a much better team than both of them. And like Scotland, even though I've been quite complimentary towards them here, last year Six Nations, they had the chance of a lifetime to beat Ireland and planned some doubts ahead of the World Cup, and they tanked in that second half. And then in the World Cup, when everything was on the line for them, they didn't show up until the game was over. So it's hard to take Scotland too seriously from an Irish point of view as well, because Ireland seem to have their physical measure. And you've got Keenan and Ringrose coming back. So, like, it's not like Ireland are going to be weakened as it goes on. Ireland have really big selection dilemma going into next week as to how they kind of fit those 2 players into their 23. So, whereas other teams are looking at dropping their out half, like England, England, there's a big discussion now about whether George Ford should continue. How do they reconstruct their back line? Whereas Ireland are trying to fit in 2 world-class players and figuring out how they can take anyone out of the team. It's such a position of strength. So, any team can lose any game, and even the greatest teams are vulnerable when they don't get it right. Like, this England team only a few months ago nearly took out South Africa in a World Cup semi-final. So there is a possibility, but I find it difficult to make the case right now.
Well, if it torrentially rains like all day in London, potentially they could replicate that. But I think that was the key moment for me in that game. Luke, from your perspective, anything, from on top of what Rud said, like, any reasons for you or anything you've seen over the first 3 rounds that have given you a little bit of pause, or anything that needs to be tidied up?
I think maybe the line out was a little bit of a worry on the weekend. I thought Wales kind of seemed to I thought Wales competed really well, but If I was England, like with Borthwick, I think, okay, where can we get into the game? And I'd say, yeah, maybe we'll have a go at that again. And you think he'll do a pretty good job. They could be pretty disruptive there. Some pretty experienced guys there. That's very disruptive to this Irish team, to their flow. Like they build so much from. You saw what it did against Wales. They were in great positions, and anytime there's open play, you think, wow, Ireland are bloody hard to contain. They're really, really good on open play. But if you get at their set piece and it gets a little bit muddly, a little bit messy, they certainly can get out of step. Thought the scrum will definitely be an area where I think they will be watching it. Ireland seemed to get the rub of the green on the weekend against Wales, but you think England will definitely target those. So to my mind, you mentioned one thing as well, like if it's raining, like that changes the complete complexion of the game. If that Jones, that South Africa style defense will be way easier to implement in wet conditions, and it will be way more successful, and it'll be way harder to be effective in open play. So there's like rugby, to my mind, is like if you can be physical, and this is why I'm always worried about away fixtures. If England can keep 15 guys in the pitch, if they're really physical, if it's a wet day, and if they can get at your set piece, there's 4 things there you can do. That's hard work and organization and basically preparation during the week. Borthwick's a bloody hard worker. He's renowned as a hard worker. I can see them being well prepared for this. They're hurting from Scotland too, so emotionally there'll be that in the background. So I just feel like this is a real dangerous fixture for Ireland. I think Scotland less so. I think we have their measure. I'd agree with you guys. I agree with Rhodes. I'm not sure you made the point, but I'm pretty sure Will feels the same. I think we have their measure. But England could cause us problems, and I'd be worried about this, and I still think that'll be a one-score game. I know it hasn't been in Fortress Twickenham for quite a while, but I still think it's an away fixture. They're not playing well. They're not a great team, but they'll be hard to beat if they defend well and if they're good at set piece. It's just rugby isn't that complex that way. And I think they'll have a good kicker on the pitch. If Ford is playing, like he still is going to be in the high 80s off the tee, probably still is a drop goal threat, as we saw. So there's all these factors that make this a possibly sticky wicket type game,
I thought Wales probably gave them a little bit of a template as well. And I know, like, South Africa and Jones has a bit of a template because South Africa have probably slowed Ireland down. I know they haven't beaten Ireland in either of the games in recent years, but they've been low-scoring, tight games that have come down to missed kicks, really. Like, both the game in Dublin and the game in Paris, Pollard wasn't playing and South Africa didn't take their chances and will probably feel like if Pollard was on the pitch, they would have won those games. So there's a few things there, but I do think Ireland, I thought they were a little bit, complacent's a strong word, but I think they were a little bit off last weekend, and I don't think they will be going to Twickenham. I think they'll get to the level that they were in Marseille. Watching back some of the lineouts, like lads were missing lifts. Peter O'Mahony misses a lift, and actually in the build up to, I think it was Calvin Nash's try, but they nearly didn't win that line out because O'Mahony was slow to the lift, which is really unlike him. I thought Wales, kind of when they were defending, were quick onto so when the ball was pulled back by the front line to the second line, they were almost anticipating that and were sliding onto it. They weren't, Andy Farrell said they were passive in attack. They weren't selling the dummy runners to the Welsh defence, and Wales knew where the ball was going to go. I think if they tighten that up and they're more convincing, if sometimes they go through the front door rather than the back door, they'll find ways through England. I think Crowley showed against Exeter in Europe that he can find his way around the blitz defence as well. And also you got, like, Felix Jones is basically dusting off a template that was designed by Leinster's defence coach. So those players have got about 7 or 8 good weeks, and Robbie Henshaw said this in today's paper. There's 7 or 8 weeks of work under Jack Nienaber, and now they're facing Jack Nienaber's defence. I don't know if you saw Charlie Morgan's tweet at the weekend, but the first minute and a half against Scotland, England did exactly what South Africa did in the first minute and a half of the World Cup game against Scotland in Marseille. Like, in terms of where the players were placing, where they kicked the ball, everything was exactly the same. They're basically trying to copy what South Africa did. So Ireland should be ready for that as well. So I find the angles to which, if Ireland aren't a bit off it as they were against Wales, and having faced what they've faced, I can see them being knocked off their stride, but I don't see them losing.
The bench would give you comfort as well, guys. We probably haven't mentioned that. Like, the bench was, like, anyone who asked me about the game of the weekend, I actually just felt like the bench would be the difference. Because I thought it would be tighter, if I'm being completely honest, around the kind of 50 to 60 minutes. So I was wrong on that. But I do think that the bench, the impact that you get, like all top of the ground, like a few top of the ground type players too, with your Bairds and Conan, like not necessarily poachers on the ground, but God, like if you were tired coming up against those athletes, like absolute nightmare. You got James Ryan who just chunked through the work, Keane Healy as well, so experienced. I think he had 11. Did he have 11 tackles or something when he was on the pitch?
A couple of huge carries.
Yeah, a couple of big carries too. Like so, yeah, I just think like. Yeah, like even McCluskey was excellent, wasn't he? Like there's everyone's kind of playing like reasonably well, and like the bench would give you comfort that, it's the one thing I'd say Ireland have as kind of a bit of an ace card against England. I think is that like if the game is tight, and you would expect with Ireland starting 15 that the game would be tight. Like I don't think it's going to be like they don't look like a team that's going to be kind of blown out, if you know what I mean. Provided they don't have a catastrophe with the red card. Or
you're talking about Ireland getting blown out by England.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
I think regardless, even if they don't play well, I think it'd be tight, is what I'm saying. And I think off the back of that, once you bring on your bench, I just think there'll be a difference. And that's what would give you that little bit of extra comfort that Ireland win the game no matter what against England. Do you know what I mean? They'd have to play really, really badly for that for them. And England played great
to that point,
to lose this one.
Like the last time they played in Twickenham in 2022, like Charlie Ewels got sent off after a couple of minutes. But remember, England got back into the game with those scrum penalties. I think it was only 15-12 maybe. And the bench came on, Conor Murray, Jack Conan had a really big impact. They ended up winning by 15-20 points with a bonus point. But it was the bench that day. You really stepped up. And the point of discipline, I think Luke touched on, like the last 3 times England and Ireland have played, England have had someone sent off. Yeah. Twice. That was in the first half. And in that Grand Slam game, it does kind of get a little bit glossed over. Ireland were very nervy and not playing well at all in that game before that really contentious red card. I still think they would have had enough to get over the line, but they weren't playing very well in that game. And obviously the Charlie Ewels one came after, was it 5 or 6 minutes? So that obviously changed the complexion there. And the other one was a World Cup warm-up game, so like it's not as relevant. But
they're at a much better stage of their development now, though. I think they're not as... I think like 2022 they were still kind of learning how to win and had a pretty difficult day in Paris 4 weeks beforehand, where they've talked about how they kind of got freaked out by the occasion and by the noise, and Twickenham was unbelievable that day. I know it gets a bit of a bad rep for its atmosphere, but that day they were so annoyed about the red card that they were on their feet, they were loud, and England really rallied and their scrum was excellent, and Ireland were in real trouble. And you're right, the bench came in and won it. And last year, I don't think you can draw parallels with last year really, because they're not going to be as nervous because it's not a final. And they've been through that experience as well. And I know they didn't really show up for the first 10 minutes against New Zealand in the quarter-final. And that is, there is evidence of this team not necessarily, when it's at its biggest, maybe not pitching up, although they did for the third test in New Zealand in 2022. So, I don't see... Even if it's 15-15, I don't see them getting on top in scrum in the same way. I think if England pick their scrummaging props, then Ireland will try and make them tackle. I think they'll try and move Joe Marler and Dan Cole around.
Dan Cole as their starting props in 2024. It seems a bit...
Like if there's 20 scrums, brilliant. But if they have to kind of try and defend Ireland's multi-phase attack, then they're going to be in a bit of trouble. So
like Marler, George and Cole, it's not like compared to the Irish front row in terms of mobility and what they had around the pitch, and the Irish guys I think can they've certainly pitched up on the tight so far in this championship. I think it's no contest.
Yeah, the question I have over the bench is if Ringrose is fit and Keenan's fit and you put Frawley into the 23 jersey or the 22 jersey, do you go back to 5-3 and put Ringrose in the 23 jersey? Or do you stick with 6-2 and he doesn't make it? What do you think, Luke?
I'd be leaning towards 6-2 away from home.
So would you leave Ringrose out?
Yeah.
Fair enough. It's hard to leave him out, I think. But I that 6-2 was...
The power you get off the bench with, having Conan, Baird and James Ryan, if you're presuming they're going to go with the same composition, like that's such a weapon, especially as Luke mentioned, in Twickenham with...
And Baird's line-out prowess, the way he's gone after like the opposition line-outs, I know he didn't make the most of those 2 breaks, but like no one else in the Irish setup, or even... There's very few players in World Rugby that can make the breaks that he's making, and I think...
Have they ever converted into scores? I feel like they just do the end of the game in a highlight reel, but I'm actually like, do they actually ever lead to like...
He almost got the off. I think one of the Welsh defenders did it, I think maybe David Jenkins, I think, but he
went the wrong way on one of them. He lost Gibson Park.
Yeah, well, I think he should have backed himself and just gone at Sam Costello, but then he reloads and goes again, which was so impressive physically, and he's just about to give the offload to Ronan Keller, who's in, but the Welsh hand comes in and dispossesses him. But I think, They need to convert them a bit better. He needs to get better at converting them. But like God,
it's not something a second
he's doing the hard part
of training that often. It's like what to do after making a 50-meter open field break, because he got one in the URC semi-final against Munster. It was disallowed for like a knock on in the build up, but I don't know if you remember the steer got the one that Munster won. I think he made a big break and scored a try, but then I think he got called back for a knock on. But yeah,
got his hat trick against Glasgow all those years ago, didn't he? But
yeah,
I mean, Craig Casey kicked the one away against Italy, which was frustrating. But look, he's doing the hard part. He's doing the part that no one else can do. You can coach him how to finish them off, I think. And I think it would be really...
Or you can coach him to not have to think you have to finish them off on that phase.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's another way of thinking about it. Like, normally when a forward goes through, because they haven't got the pace, and everyone else who's running after them doesn't have a ball, so they're even that little bit more quicker, if you know what I mean? So they catch you quick. You're always saying, cool the jets, look for support. Whereas to him, I'd nearly say, do you know what? You just keep going. Yeah. It's on everyone else to resource that ruck. You just keep going. And I think it'll become obvious for him. When you simplify it for them a little bit sometimes, where you're like, look, don't be worried. You take wherever you see the biggest space, you go for that. It's on everyone else to catch you. And then it kind of becomes obvious, that kind of way.
No one saw it coming. Like Gibson Park's the first man onto the first break, but Kieran Frawley's kind of running away from him. You can actually see his facial expression going, oh, shit. And he tries to catch up with him, and he's actually on the shoulder that Baird turns into, but he's just not quite there.
Baird's faster than Frawley.
Baird's so fast, they couldn't get with him. But I mean, again, they're only learning to play with this guy at international level. And look, you can't plan for these breaks. But I think it would be cruel to drop him at this point, because I think he's been really effective in all the games that he's played. But Ringrose is such a compelling case for picking Ringrose as well. But I think you have to have, if you're going 6-2, you have to have Frawley. And so it's whether... Yeah, it's Baird. I think it's Baird. It's one of the most unusual, like, presuming they're not going to break up the centre partnership. I think that would be very unfair to do that. You're in this really unusual situation of having to pick between a centre and a kind of a number 6. You've also got the thing of O'Mahony hasn't gone through 80 yet in this tournament, and they've kind of taken him off reasonably early in all the games as well, even though he's the captain. So there's it's a big dilemma, I think, for Farrell to kind of work through this week. And my gut would be to stick with the winning formula.
Yeah, and it's been like another thing that we has been discussed a lot, but like the configuration of the bench has been a massive kind of new feature of the Six Nations. Like it hadn't been done under Andy Farrell. Like we talked about 6-2 splits, 7-1s, 8-0s at the World Cup, but like that's kind of, not that it's underrated because it has been discussed a lot, but that's a big call now to be going for it in big games and to be comfortable with it and seeming to be the new norm depending on who you're playing.
Yeah. I would have called for it a few times. I think Sexton was the barrier because they were never sure that they could get Sexton through. And if they lost him early or they lost him, that they kind of felt like they had to have a lot of backline coverage. And now because Crowley can cover a couple of positions, he's younger, they're more confident that he can get through the 80. Obviously, Frawley's also given them a lot of comfort as well. And also, it's a sign that they've learned something from the World Cup. Now, you could argue that they didn't need to lose a World Cup quarter-final to figure out that this was a way of playing to your strengths. Maybe they didn't.
Jimmy O'Brien had a good game though. That was
the best I've ever seen him play. He was he had an unbelievable cameo, didn't he?
Because I was looking at the quarterfinal bench today to be like, would it have worked? But
the Sexton thing is the most important point for me there. Like you just because you have all those kind of soft tissue background, he's pulling calves, pulling groin, things like that. Just things that happen to you as you kind of become an older player. I think that's the really. Sorry, you might be making another point on it, but to be honest with you. That to me encapsulates why you had to have the 3. You couldn't just have, because then you literally couldn't have one more injury outside of your 9, and you obviously have to have a specialist 9 there, unless you have someone else who can kind of play it, but they never did. So I think that's the most important point about the whole thing is that has now changed. You now have is he 24, like a 24-year-old, like in that position, and I think is Frawley 24 as well. He's
26,
maybe he's 28. Is he 27 or something?
26,
Yeah. So, two young guys there at the prime of their career, you don't have to worry about them going 80 and pulling a hamstring, that kind of way. So that really does help.
Yeah, well, it'll be a big.
By the way, Frawley was outstanding on the weekend. I that was another thing I did not see. I know we probably won't get a chance to cover it in depth, but that was unbelievably impressive. I thought he was brilliant at fullback. I really didn't think he would have the specialist skills to thrive there, but he looked strong and quick. Some lovely bits of handling in there too, and the kicking game. It's nice to have. It took a lot of pressure off Crowley, I think. It was nice to have another ball player there because if you pick Aki and Henshaw, you probably lose a little bit there, just in turn. And you look, I know Keenan's excellent there, but Frawley, I thought he was really good. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, I agree.
I was impressed by.
I thought they were smart as well. I thought they because he's a centre, half of the season, they decided, well, why don't we put him in the front line and put Crowley in the backfield where he's comfortable enough as well. So actually, even the bombs that went up, very few of them Frawley was there for because he was up defending. So I thought they kind of integrated him into the team and protected him a little bit. Now, Wales didn't go after him in the way that Gatland kind of said that he would. He had to wait a long time to get into the game.
That's what I just say. That's what impressed me most when he got his touches. He was still super sharp because the first half, I think he touched the ball properly for the first time, like in the last couple of minutes of the first half.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I agree. I thought,
and your first start, like, were nervy, but
I thought it will give them great comfort as they have now a backup. Like, we want to see him again in a bigger game against a better opposition who'll test him, but there's. He is a viable backup for Hugo Keenan now.
Good chance he might start at Twickenham. Like, I was reading the Keenan quotes that Keane sent in earlier, and it was like, "Oh, I haven't trained yet." Like,
I think Keenan will be okay.
He probably will be. But I remember Joe Schmidt saying one time Chris Farrell popped straight up and he tore his ACL and never played. No, that didn't happen. Like, but we've heard them say updates before.
My understanding, because first Keenan came out today and said he hopes to be fit. Farrell has said it, and like, I always take these things with a pinch of salt, but from a fairly good source, I've heard that Keenan's on track for Twickenham, and so is Ringrose. So unless there's a setback, and like it was a 4 to 6er, and we're looking at 4 weeks. So, but he's so fit and so healthy and looks after himself so well. I think he'll give himself every chance. And like, if he is fit, he has to start.
Yeah. Well, there'll be
does Ringrose come in ahead of McCluskey as well?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because for all you,
sorry, I'm thinking if Keenan's injured. Sorry, I should have prefaced by saying, so say Keenan doesn't get back and you pick Frawley. What do you do with that other slot?
I think you go Ringrose.
I think McCluskey's been very, very good. Very harsh.
Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw were both covering the wing slots, and Robbie did a post-match interview, and we were asking, how did that work? And he goes, well, neither of us have ever played there before, so it was basically the blind leading the blind. So Ringrose, I think, comes in partly because he's Gary Ringrose, partly because he's more versatile, and you have 12 coverage from both Crowley and Frawley, and you have then 13, 14.
Yeah,
I think that makes
and he's played a bit
sense.
in the wing this year recently with Leinster.
And I think it's harsh on McCluskey. McCluskey's whole career, and it looks like he might go to Bayonne at the end of the season. So this might be the last hurrah for Stuart McCluskey in a green jersey. But God, he's making every minute he's out there count. He looks like such a comfortable. Like, he must feel like he's been robbed of 60 odd caps by just being born in this era.
Yeah, and he had some big impacts on. Like, I know the game was won, but in the build-up,
the fourth try. Bonus points could win the title if they lose, if they slip up. Like, that all came from his tackling Conan, and then he got in on the counter ruck and they win the penalty, and that's what builds up to the fourth try. And he's been superb, and he was great in last year's championship as well. He was a real key player in that Grand Slam last year. So
yeah, and it was great. Like, not that it really mattered in the end, but I'm glad he got to play against Scotland at the World Cup. He would have been the only player, I think, who didn't feature, if I'm right in saying, had there not been that little late injury to Bundyaki. But there'll be plenty of selection dilemmas and talking points to get into next week. Before we finish up, I want to touch, before we do our moment of the week, Dan McFarland gone from Ulster. You mentioned Stuart McCluskey there. It looks like there could be a pretty mass exodus at the end of the season. Remains to be seen exactly who's gone, but not for the first time. They've kind of lurched back into crisis. Richie Murphy will be in a couple of weeks until the end of the season, and who knows after that.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, you could see the writing on the wall as we kind of talked about them, when we have done, it's been a fairly grim couple of years. I think Dan McFarland did a very good job stabilising that club and putting them on the right track. And, it's only, just before he took over, Brian O'Driscoll was describing them as a basket case, and you couldn't really argue with them in the wake of the trial and everything. And I think he built a team that was very, very good and nearly took Leinster out in his first season in Europe, and got close to a URC and certainly a URC final over in Cape Town that time. And really, that was the moment. If Manny Libbok, or if that late try hadn't happened, or if Ulster were able to hang on in that game, then they would have had a home final a week later against the Bulls. And at least, even if it gone sour, he'd have a trophy to look back on. But they were kind of just ended up being nearly men, and they plateaued after that lost Jarrah Payne. And like, they were just so bad this year, apart from like 2 weeks where they beat Racing and Leinster, and there was like a dead cat bounce. And I think, from what you hear, like at RFU level, it was a big inquest into what we're going to do with this place, because it's not pulling its weight. Like, for the first time in the history of Irish rugby, they went to Marseille and they played an international without one player from Ulster. Like, the first time ever in the history of Irish rugby. They've had the squads with no Ulster rugby player, but they've had players who were from Ulster, like who played for Trinity or who were based in England. This was the first, it's supposed to be a 4-province model, everyone pulling their weight. Well, right now, Ulster is not really doing that. It's certainly not fulfilling its potential. And the fact that David Humphreys is starting his job next month, as the RFU performance director, who is probably one of the people in the world who's most synonymous with Ulster rugby, and this is top of his, like, along with probably fixing women's rugby and keeping the show on the road on the national level, top of his things to do.
Can I ask you something? Because I was actually, a video came up on my Instagram feed. It was you talking on Off the Ball. It was a snippet about Ulster, and it was, a lot of people always say, oh, why doesn't Leinster player X go there, Leinster player Y? And you were just saying that they don't want to go. They're being offered it, and they're just saying, I'm not going.
Well, I think Luke could probably speak to this more than I can, but players have gone both to Leinster and from Leinster to other provinces. Hasn't worked out. Like Jordy Murphy went, and you would have thought, he had a good career with Ulster, but his Ireland chances kind of dried up after he left. I mean, other players have gone, and it's kind of just never really happened for them. I think players in Leinster see it as, and like we could talk about Frawley, Scott Penny, there are a number, Max Deegan, players who you think, well, God, get out of there and get some games somewhere else. But they feel, well, I'm only one injury away from getting a good run of games at Leinster, and if I'm playing well for Leinster, then I get into the Ireland setup. But I think Luke maybe can speak to from a player's point of view as to what your motivation would be in terms of going or staying. But I think when you're looking at what's going on up there, and they talk to each other as well, obviously they've all been in national camps with players from Ulster, so they can always ring and go, what's it like up there? And if the word on the ground is that it's not great coaching wise, then that's going to be a problem. Maybe Richie going up there, who has a great knowledge of the under-20s of the last couple of years and a good relationship with those players, and even some of the national players, he might have a better kind of relationship to be able to leverage to get a player up the road. But I think it's a hard sell, especially if they're losing all of their frontline players, or a lot of their frontline players, not all, that's very dramatic, but a lot of kind of, they're starting 10, their talisman and McCluskey, if he goes, there's a lot of players out the exit door this year. Filling the Ulster squad full of Leinster lads is not going to fix things either. Like, it has to be a bit it has to come from within a little bit, and they need to get more out of their academy and more players through. So it's a massive job. I don't know, like, if Richie gets it, or if they bring in someone. I know Brendan Fanning has floated Ian Foster's name as a kind of an overseer to kind of come in, but whoever it is, it's a huge job, and the finances don't sound great either. So it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I don't know how they pay for Ian Foster if their finances aren't good.
They pay for Stephen Kitsoff somehow.
Yeah. Do you want to come in, Luke, on that, or any of that?
Yeah, look, it's a tricky one, Like, I'm not sure I'd ever been able to bring myself to go up and play for them, to be honest. But I think if you were stuck for if you weren't playing in your position, like I thought, like, if I was fit, I was going to be starting in a position in Leinster, which straight away, like, why would I move? So it's hard for me to speak to it personally, right? But I think if I was in different situations, though, I certainly would be considering it. Like, if I think of, like, Frawley is the one I've been calling for ages, because I feel like they've got a big problem at 10. Burns is kind of, he's just not going to take it to the top table, I don't think. And I think, look, he's a good player, and he has some nice touches, some nice short kicking game, etc. But not a big guy, and I don't think he gives you enough around the pitch. I always think Frawley, that is made for someone like him. And if he could come in alongside a Doak, a Cooney on his inside, and then he's got McCluskey. Hume obviously hasn't really kicked on, but, like, he's still quality, I think, and has, certainly got potential. And then you add one or two things into that pack. You get Henderson playing week on week. And I think it would look quite different there, because I think they have a dangerous back three. They've obviously had some bloopers in the last, like, the Heineken Cup fixtures, like, Jesus, like, that was, the Champions Cup fixtures, McCluskey and obviously a few other bloopers there from their back there. But generally speaking, they're pretty exciting and they're pretty good players back there. I always feel like if you can sort out the pack and sort out 10, I think things could look very different very quickly up in Ulster. I do think, the academy is very important up there. I think if you think about the crowd and what it's all about up there, having their own, having guys that they can kind of cheer about. I don't think plugging loads of Leinster players is the answer. I think you're right on that. But I do think it would be a shame to lose out on some of the talent in Leinster, which is why I always say it. There's definitely a couple of names where I'm kind of saying, that guy's not going to play week in and week out for Leinster. He might play, and there's less league games for them to play in now as well. He's definitely not. That guy's relying on 2 injuries to get into a Champions Cup slot. Maybe even 1, and that's never a situation you want to be in. You need to show more of yourself to even come back to a situation, if you were to come back to Leinster, to get in ahead of those people or to get into an Irish setup. So there's definitely a case there for a few people in certain situations that are really, really top class rugby players that just haven't been able to show their wear. So there's a balance to be struck there. in terms of that, because you do need to have local guys. I do think if you sort out a few of those things, and you like a good head coach in rugby, it's really anywhere. It's really anywhere. Any sport, like it's so important. Like it's so important. You can think of it like you need someone that can get everyone moving in the right direction and that's smart. And I think Dan did a good job, but I think at some point his man management skills, I think, seem to have let him down somewhere as well. I think his relationship with the press wouldn't have helped. There's obviously financial stuff and all those kind of things that are going on, bubbling in the background, which don't help. But I do think personality is quite important. Like you need people to like going into work every day. If you look at Farrell, like even Schmidt, who's not unbelievably, like he can be wearing because he's so demanding. Like he's interesting and he's smart, and you can go in there going, do you know what? Like this guy will win your rugby games. If you don't have that, if you're not on another level like Schmidt is in terms of the detail, which I don't think McFarland is, he's very good, I hear. But if you're not at that level, you need to be kind of a nice guy, at least with your top. You're not a nice guy, but you need to be a really good man manager, I think. And I'm not sure that that's always been the case up there. I think he can rub people up the wrong way. So, I feel for him. I think it was a really tough job, and it is still a tough job. But I think the right decision was made. We talked about it, Will, the night before, like literally broke the next morning on the podcast that week. We were saying, yeah, it looks like it's kind of becoming untenable up there. So bad luck that we were talking about just the night before. We weren't able to give any clarity. But I feel for him. I think he'll get another job somewhere else. Hopefully the situation is different for him when he can make an impact, because he's definitely a good coach. But obviously he's kind of a gruff guy, I think. You can tell that from his interviews after the game. So I think he can rub people up the wrong way. So he might need to have a look at that and see if that's right. So look, that's probably all I have to say on that one. It's a tough job. It's an unenviable task, I think, at this point, isn't it? Just with the finances in the background as well.
Yeah, and it's like tough for Richie Murphy coming in. I think like a couple of days after the last 20s game, he's off to South Africa for a 2-match tour. That won't be easy. Like the record for the provinces going down there hasn't been great since the URC brought them in. And then there's the knockout games in Europe, which they might ultimately need to win that tournament to get into the Champions Cup.
Well, they're above Connacht and Munster in the table, aren't they? Like they're not in the doldrums as such. Like they're still firmly in the playoff race. They've been consistently a playoff team, and there are good players there. So like if there are a lot moving on, I think there's a bit of a rebuild to be done at the end of this season. But if Richie can go up there and harness what they have and give, like, even just the fact that a lot of those players haven't been playing for the team or the coach, I think, for a while, there hasn't looked like a cohesive, everyone pulling in the right direction. So like I think there could be a bit of a bounce from having a fresh voice. Luke would have worked with Richie. Like he's done a very good job at the 20s. If he puts together a plan that they can follow and he goes on tour to South Africa, gets the players together, like not a lot of them will be involved with Ireland over the next couple of weeks. So there's a chance to bring them all, get a bit of feel good, a bit of siege mentality, come back, they can even either sack off the Challenge Cup or give that a right good go, or and go for the URC playoffs and get themselves in a pretty healthy position. I'm not saying they're going to win everything, but in the short term, you can see a path to them being very competitive towards the end of the season, because there's not many teams able to go and win in the RDS, and they've done that under Dan McFarland recently during a low point in their kind of cycle. So I think the long term prospects are probably where I'd be a bit more doom and gloom. I actually think this season, if he can kind of galvanise them and get them playing, there's a team there, if they can keep Henderson fit and a couple of others, to at least give it a bit of a run for the rest of the season and get a bit of feel good going. Yeah,
we discussed it with Jonathan Bradley at the time when they were kind of pushing the Challenge Cup. Like, it doesn't have that much cachet in terms of winning it, but there's good teams in it. Like, it would actually be a good rugby achievement to go through that and win it. Like, there's some quality teams in it. So, like, that's still something to play for. And as you said, the URC is still a live proposition, albeit last couple of weeks haven't been great results. So we're going to finish up now with the left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland. I'm going with Duhan van der Merwe's try. Which one, you might ask? The second one, the long range one along the touchline. And to be fair to Duhan van der Merwe, like when he's on form with front football, he is an absolute handful. Like 2 really good tries against Wales, 3 really good tries against Twickenham. I know, Luke, I don't think you're a big fan of this. He
gave away the first try. He was out of position for the first try. Like he's all over the shop for the English try. So, like, he'll give you 1-2. You know what I mean? If you can contain him, he'll give you
3-to-1 ratio. If you're giving 1 and getting 3, like I think you can do that.
Well, yeah, no, sorry. The one of them, sorry. I think if you ask me personally, it's 1 for 1. Like, I think the one he makes is magic. The one he gets where the England drop the ball, I think, isn't it? And they turn it over and he goes 60. That's the one you get. You're like, okay, well, he's square for me for the day. The other ones were kind of good team play, I think, as well, No?
Yeah, no, fair. Finn Russell put one on the plate for him with a lovely kick, and the other one was just good rugby generally. But no, just to be fair, when he's in full throw, he got a good one against Wales in the first round as well, where I think he beat a few defenders as well. So yeah, that's my moment of the week. Give one to Scotland. I've given them enough grief over the years.
I didn't mean to burst your balloon there. Sorry,
no,
he's magic when he's in full flow. Sorry, yeah, he's like a broken field runner, so strong, quick, good footwork. He's class in that. But I'd be nervous now if I was the defense coach. I'd be thinking, oh, don't go down that side.
But even his finishing style when he's trying to, he's obviously
why did he do the jump?
So stupid. He almost went at the touch. He was trying to get right in the corner.
But I think taking out the flag is part of the celebration, isn't it? That's what he's trying to do. I think so, because otherwise he deviates from his line and puts his left foot closer to the touch line and then hurls himself into the flag and puts it down. It's so it just gives you shivers about what could happen.
Wonder how much is going on upstairs. You'd be kind of going well, that would make sense with how bad he is defensively. You know what I mean? But
it gives you Freddie Burns
against, I thought.
Freddie Burns against Toulouse. All the was it? I don't know. Was it Dominici years ago? Players who celebrate before they put the ball down. It just give you the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, God. Rod, what's your moment of the week?
I'm going to go for Calvin Nash's try and probably the two moments in the... Sorry, not Calvin Nash, James Lowe's try. Joe McCarthy's carry, in a first half where Ireland kind of struggled to penetrate, he just found the right line and took out, he left Wainwright for dead and then follows it up with Calvin Nash just drawing his man and producing a brilliant pass for James Lowe. It was a high quality try. I know Ty Burns' try was pretty good as well, but I think that was probably the moment of the game, and it was the game I was at, so I'm going to go for that one.
Yeah, well, we didn't really get a chance to talk about Calvin Nash, but he's had a really good tournament. Stepping in for Matt Canson, who we would have seen as a huge loss, and Calvin Nash slotted in very seamlessly, so fair play to him. Luke, you could sign us off. What was your moment of the week?
Mine isn't a positive one, really. It's the kick, the Italian kick, Carbisi one. I just
love the drama.
It was unbelievable drama.
It was just drama, wasn't it? Yeah, I know it didn't work out as probably we all would have hoped, but I still think it had everything, didn't it? It was like a Six Nations moment, wasn't it? Last kick of the game.
Sorry, I was going to say it was funny because it was last week. My moment of the week, I think, was a TMO France-Scotland moment. So if you're a French supporter, you've had week one, you probably went down to Marseille as a big trip. Big trip, got absolutely hockeyed by Ireland. Week two, it comes down to that ridiculous play, and then week three, you have that ridiculous play. It's been a funny tournament.
It's just drama, isn't it? But look, I know I said the quality hasn't been great in the Six Nations, but things could all turn upside down if England beat us at home in kind of 10 days or so. Which is unlikely, I think, but not beyond the realms. And I think, to my mind, the competition still has these kind of big moments. At the end of games, it's still a great competition. Even the France-Scotland one, you know what I mean? They're kind of those. I know there's a few contentious ones, and the officials have made a few mistakes, but it still keeps you on the edge of your seat. I just love this competition. I think it's brilliant. So yeah, that's my moment of the week.
I think we should give a consolation prize or shout out to. I actually had to look up his name, but Pennyasi.
That was my original moment.
I'm not as committed. I'm not going to lie and say I watched the game live, but I've watched the clip about 100 times at this stage. What a try!
That's a 105-meter try, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredible.
I honestly think it could be. If anyone doesn't know, Stade Francais Racing at the weekend. Google, you'll find the try on YouTube. The Stade winger scores. I actually think it could be the best try I've ever seen, just in terms of an individual effort, taking it along your own touchline, kind of sprinting across, getting away from the cover, a little chip.
No, team. You got to go
you're going to have barbarians in the 50 years ago.
The amount of people touching the ball, the pace he comes on.
Individual try, now maybe your best individual try potentially, but
it fits in well with the kind of Rupeni Kakao YouTube reels that I've watched obsessively over the years.
That against,
yeah,
that he's making people look absolutely silly in that, isn't he? That's Rúaidhrí and his pomp and a few other top quality guys. He makes them look like nothing. That Kakao at his best was unstoppable.
Well, look, we could debate these all night, but
I want to go home.
I was hoping for more ones.
Count kind of bigger. We'll go back 20 years for a moment of the week now.
Some Cullen ones.
Moment of the century.
Well.
Here, someone turn off Luke's mic. I think I think we'll leave it there. I thank Luke and Rudd for joining me on this week's episode of Left Wing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another show looking ahead to Ireland versus England. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.